so don't think it's deja vu. It tends to go backwards of its own free will. So if you think you've seen the slide, that's probably true. I just thought I'd start with a little background about just the general area. Liberty, of course, was the second county seat for Bedford County. The first one was in New London. Bedford County was formed in 1754, and New London was going along fine, but then there began to be some complaints that it was kind of too far to one edge of the county. So they surveyed the county and decided to find pretty much the exact center. And there was a donation of 100 acres of land, and this was in 1782 for the new county seat, and I think there was a lot of patriotic fervor at that time, so they called it Liberty. And this was the original plan. This is a drawing, but the slide that I have out of the deed book is a little dim, so this just shows you kind of what the main street was and the lots that were blocked off and the original part of the town. Of course, the first courthouse was located where the D-Day offices are now. And then there was a second courthouse, and there was discussion about how it was too noisy and it was too close to the road. So later on, they built this, which I believe dates from about 1834. And this is a drawing from Pollock's sketchbook, which if you haven't had a chance to see that, it's a nice little book. It's been reproduced by Peter V. Meister. That's what it looks like. And so it's available for you to buy. But it was kind of a little promotional book from 1886-87. So this is kind of what they were showing at that time. This is a later photo from around the turn of the century of that building. Of course, they tore this down to build a courthouse that's there now. And as it was told to us by Mr. Venable, he, as a young person, hauled away the bricks and built the fire station that was located, that was also torn down, sort of in front of B&B Printing on Market Square, and that was a brick building. So they used the bricks from this to build that. And that's where the famous Bedford Firemen's Band go there, rehearsal space. This was a little sketch done by Lewis Miller, I think this was 1852, and it shows, you can see the courthouse at the top of the hill, and the little train coming along. So this is kind of Jail Hill, I call it, where you come down by the back of the courthouse, and that's where the depot was at this time. So that gives you a little idea of sort of all those fences, and it still was a pretty rural area. This was the picture out of Pollock's sketchbook of the depot. This was the building that's kind of located on Main Street where the Burke Scott building is. It was one of the buildings that were torn down to, that Burke Scott building, of course, was the post office, and this that I'm leaning on right now came out of the post office, and we have a whole display because in typical government fashion, they photographed and documented everything. So they took pictures before they started demolition. They took pictures all the way through the construction of the post office. So it's interesting to see some of the buildings on either side, but this is kind of a huge structure that was downtown, but is no longer. And of course, this is what the Episcopal Church, which is now 2 doors down, it's now the Christian Church. That's this building. And those wild spires, and if you look hard at that building under the white paint and some of the additions, you can see that the windows are very similar to the Presbyterian Church. So this is, I don't remember exactly, but probably the 1840 or something. Oh, yeah. In fact, Bowyer Campbell, who was a relative of the Avenel family, who wrote a lot of stories, just talked about, you know, how he just thought these were atrocious, and he wrote a little essay about how bizarre they were. So this was St. John's Episcopal Church before it moved across the street. And notice the picket fence. There were so many picket fences in town. That was just what everybody had. So when you walk out, if you go down the street, you know, you can gaze at that, but it's very much of a Greek revival building, plus the bizarre steeple. This is Gray's map of Liberty, which doesn't ever have a date on it for real. Just by what's on the map and what's not on the map, I'm guessing it's around 1884, 85-ish, sometime in that period. And you've perhaps been looking at the one that's on the table here, where you can get a close-up version. Dr. Thomas M. Bowyer, that and Mrs. Burrell. That's Avenel up in that big section. And you see the Vineyard and Vineyard Street. Vineyard Street was the original name for College Street because Dr. Bowyer had a vineyard. And we have a little copy of an ad that he had selling his grapes. So you can see the railroad track, and you see the Hammond or Haymond house. That's on Bedford Avenue. That's down here on the corner, which you know is the Noakes family. And you can see that the Bedford Avenue didn't exist in this. A lot of that area came off the original Avenel property because they sold the land for the railroad. Mr. Burrell was a great proponent of the railroad and the development of the railroad all over the country. So they were the ones that sold property. You see, if you look on that left edge of that map, Mrs. Burrell, the Avenel property went all the way over to where Piedmont Label is now. And it was basically in a woods, a big oak grove. In fact, there were stories about the Indians, and there was a spring sort of down by Piedmont Label, and people going down there, and Indians showing up in the early days. It was kind of still on the frontier. But if you have a chance, look at it. It's interesting to find not only Bedford Avenue, but you can see parts down Longwood and North Street and some of those areas that are right interesting to detail. Like I was saying, Bedford Avenue was originally part of the Avenel property, and this is sort of what Avenel looked like in all those trees. Of course, the original entrance to Avenel Avenue didn't exist, and the way you got to Avenel was through a cedar line lane right here by the library. In fact, behind the library, where the tennis courts used to be, there are still a couple of cedar trees that exist from that cedar line lane. So you came off of North Bridge Street and went back through in the circular drive that exists now. That was the real thing. So the real front door to Avenel is off that circular drive, not the one that fronts onto Avenel Avenue. And you can see it didn't have the big porch. It had the two small porches. In fact, here's a picture we think is Mrs. Burrell. And that's the real front door, as we call it. But basically what they did at the turn of the century was just, when the Ballards acquired the property, was just to join those two porticos together and make that big wraparound porch. But those columns are just whole trees. They're right interesting. When they did the porch restoration, I only had to replace a couple of them that were in pretty good shape.
Now, if that barrel is holding up that corner of the porch, maybe we're not in all that bad a shape.
Things were pretty rough after the Civil War. I don't think there was a lot of money around. So things were. And this house, I know it is the early house, and it's had more work done to it than this is a little bit of an older slide. This is on College Street. Is it Buttrup's?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're having a copper roof put on it.
Ooh. Oh, very nice.
Is that John?
Yeah.
Is that John?
Jonathan.
And Lisa?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can see the stylistic similarities. This is a house from probably about the, Avenel's 1838, and this house is probably maybe the 40s. Same thing with the funeral home across the street is that same period. In fact, they all may have been built by the same person.
Sarah Kennedy's house, too,
Yeah,
was very similar.
Yeah, and also a framed version of this is the William Graves house, which is Annette Fessel's house. It's across from the middle school, and it was moved to build the stucco building, the stucco school. And so it was originally located, but that's a very similar house in frame instead of brick. And here's Avenel. You can see, minus the porch, how you get that similar three-bay design, pretty much Greek revival style of that mid-1800s. Here we go backwards. Sorry. Oh man, I don't know why. Just all of a sudden, that's just a detail of the cornice from Avenel to show you that being real and the little dental block, and they just took a lot of time doing details. All right, this is more in your neighborhood now. This is out of the deed books, and this is 1884. The Liberty Land and Improvement Company. The land sort of development business was kind of heating up. Bedford was growing, and everybody got very excited about this. And in this sketchbook, I'll just read a section of this. there's a whole section on the Liberty Improvement Company. The Syndicate of Local Capitalists was formed in 1884 with the object, as its name implies, of permanently improving the town by opening up desirable building property and assisting in the erection of dwelling houses on their land. For this purpose, they acquired the land off the fine street known as Bedford Avenue, upon which, with their aid, several handsome residences have already been built, and others are now in course of construction. Bedford Avenue is one of the best and most picturesque localities in the town, being centrally situated with a good fall for drainage purposes and commanding an extended view of the beautiful surrounding country, including the lofty peaks of Otter. It goes on to describe the custom of the companies to sell their lots at reasonable prices and on easy terms. This was kind of the beginning of mortgages and paying on time. And they would help you find some money to build your house. And to those who are familiar with the personnel of the town, the names of the